Hi, good evening. I'm Hubert Kozak, a librarian here at the Burbank Public Library, and I want to welcome you all tonight for Seeing Through the Trees, California Wildfires, a Native American Perspective, presented in cooperation with KCET and the Autry Museum of the American West. The plan for tonight's program is to have Josh Garrett-Davis of the Autry tell you a little bit first about the KCET Autry Museum collaboration. And then screen one of the episodes of Tending the Wild series, the one on cultural burning. It runs about 18 minutes. After that, we'll follow that with a panel that will use that screening as a starting point for a general discussion about Native American fire practices. The chat feature is off, but you can post questions to Q&A, and we will try to get through many of them as we can after the formal conversation. The whole program should last about an hour and 15 minutes or so. Tonight's program is part of Burbank Reads, a month-long series of programs on ecological sustainability built around our One Book, One City selection, which is Robin Wall Kilmer's Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teachings of Plants. This event has come about because we wanted to create programming that would highlight the traditional ecological knowledge and practices explored in braiding sweetgrass. We're trying to figure out what programming we might do. I became aware of the wonderful programming KCET and the Autry have done on so many of the same themes presented in the book. They have worked together to produce an impressive documentary series, Tending the Wild and Tending Nature, and the Autry has created a permanent exhibit, Human Nature, on these themes. What they have done together is an impressive exposition of these subjects in film and exhibit, a way for a popular audience to learn about the importance of what Indigenous people have to contribute to our current discussions about the environmental crisis. But they have also modeled how different mediums, film and an immersive physical exhibition, can be integrated in such a way to make a more powerful communication on these themes than if one medium alone had been used. And all of this is right here in our own community. In presenting this program tonight, we want to make more people aware of what they have done around the very themes that are most important in our Burbank Reads program. The best way to give you something representative of the series, we thought, was to let you sample one of the episodes from it. We're going to show you the episode that runs on cultural burning from the Tending the Wild series, and then follow that with a discussion with Heidi Lucero and Dahl Aldern, both of who are in that film, that explores how Indigenous wisdom and practice concerning fire may hold ideas relevant to the concerns all of us share about California wildfires. Our idea is to model the kind of inclusive conversation we think is vital and that we hope all of the films in the series, as well as the themes of braiding sweetgrass, might inspire. Before we screen the episode, Josh Garrett-Davis is going to tell you a little bit about the collaboration between KCET and the Autry, how it came about the exhibit at the Autry, about KCET's forthcoming programming for November in Native American Heritage Month, and about planned additions to the Autry's exhibition. Josh Garrett-Davis is the Gamble Associate Curator at the Autry Museum of the American West, where he helped curate the Human Nature exhibition about Native California and the environment. He served as an associate producer on KCET's Tending the Wild. He's the author of a memoir, Ghost Dances, Proving Up on the Great Plains, which I highly recommend, and also What is a Western? Region, Genre, and Imagination, which I intend to read. I'll turn it over to you, Josh.
Well, thank you, Hubert, for lining this whole program up, and thanks to my co-panelists who will meet after the film. It's really good to be revisiting this topic with you all. And so as Hubert said, I'm one of the curators at the Autry, which is on Gabrielino Tongva homelands, and that's where I too am coming from Tongva homelands here in Los Angeles. And I've been at the Autry, I came to the Autry about in 2016, just the last probably 9 months of this, the development of this project when it first, in its first inception. And so I've, over that time, gotten to learn a lot from Tonga folks and other Native California peoples during that period of time, and look forward to more. So this collaboration came out of, this was the first, really the biggest renovation that had happened to permanent galleries at the Autry Museum in its 30+ year history, in 2016. And it was to renovate a large chunk of the lower level of the museum, including the outdoor garden space, which is now is an ethnobotanical garden of native California plants, as well as a media space and a rotating temporary exhibition, and then the core permanent exhibition that really connects closely with this idea of traditional ecological knowledge from the indigenous people of California. And one of the challenges with an exhibition, even though, as Hubert said, it's wonderful to be able to be in a space with historic objects and contemporary artworks and text and all these things, to create an immersive story, and that kind of does affect us potentially in ways that maybe a book or a film might not. But it was so important that that the voices of Native California people and the faces of Native California people and the landscapes that they're talking about were included. And so the opportunity came up to collaborate with KCET, and to help go out. They had the expertise in terms of filmmaking and the bandwidth to sort of go out and tell some of these stories. And it's not possible to be comprehensive, but that we were able to sort of focus on a few topics that kind of captured some different regions of the state and some different topics, important topics. So there's a section in the exhibition on salmon that mostly focuses on the Klamath River Basin. There's a section on fire, which we're talking about tonight. There's a section on the desert, which mostly focuses on the southeastern part of the state, and a focus on plants as food and medicine. And then the plant section is actually going to be changed next year. And this always was meant to rotate every few years. Each section is a module. And we are focusing in this new section on waterways, specifically here in coastal Southern California and the maritime peoples of this region. And Heidi, who you'll meet later, is one of the experts that we're working with on this section. So stay tuned for that. And I also wanted to mention, and then yet another sort of form, as Hubert mentioned, the different forms. There are lots of articles on the KCET site. And then one new innovation is that there is now a digital curriculum that's been developed with the education department at the Autry and KCET, focused on the restoring the river section that mostly focuses on the Klamath, as I said, up in Northern California, restoring the river, working with Karuk and Yurok and Hupa peoples up there on that content. So those of you who are involved with education might be able to look out for that. And so I think that covers that sort of the origin of this. But that is it went from this 1 hour documentary and the short segments, that one of which we're seeing tonight. And it was such a powerful series of stories, and there were more that needed to be told. And KCET and the Autry were able to continue on for 3 more seasons of Tending Nature with different half-hour episodes on all sorts of different topics within Native California and traditional ecological knowledge. And the kind of culminating episode is going to be airing November 14th. It's called Indigenous Land Stewardship, Tending Nature. So look out for that, November 14th at 8 p.m. But I think that's enough of a sort of background on the overall project, and we'll pick up the conversation afterward, and I'll let you all see this episode, Cultural Burning. So thank you. Look forward to more discussion.
You have to know how to work with fire. When you're my age, I take my young ones out, smell the smoke. Smell it. That's grass fire. Smell the smoke, that's a house burning. Smell the smoke, that's tires burning. That's a wood fireplace burning. You should be able to smell every single different kind of smoke. The animals teach their young to do that. But if there's no fire, they can't teach them to do that. That's why we have to burn. That's why we have to keep the fires going, so that all parts of life understand what it is that we're doing with fire. The North Fork Mono and most of the other Mono groups have been here for 15,000 years. When the Indian was out on the land, they always burned. So the use of fire comes through your land so that it can take care of your resources and give you new ones. Cultural burning is exactly that. So when we burn, we are burning to perfect this resource to supply resources for our culture, rather it be food, medicine, fiber, sticks, basketry material.
Didn't you guys just burn it?
It's been a few years. We've burned like, I don't know, 50 yards in all directions. And so this was part of like a little plot we had burned here.
So these are new shoots right here coming up. It's good to see this. We'll have the berries to eat. If you eat them red and dry with salt,
In this particular area, this is where we've been burning for the past 5-6 years. We've applied fire here a couple of times. This is the Mariposa gray leaf manzanita. This is a medicine, both food and medicine. The berry could be, once it's fermented, a really good drink for your stomach. One of the things that we've done here is we've burned underneath this and pruned this bush up, trimmed it up so that, one, it will have these nice big bunches of berries. And then on the stalk here, the bark is peeling. This bark is used for poison oak. When you're burning, you try to get the wind to go in the direction of the resource that you want to apply smoke to. Smoke helps the leaves and the berries to become a better product. Consequently, there's been new growth. That's all a part of the end result of applying fire and smoke to the resource. We were burning an area that hadn't been burned for well over 100, 120 years. And when we did burn, these bushes that we're standing in the middle of that are basically 3 foot tall were about 5 or 6 feet tall, and so thick you could not walk through them. So dry that lichen and California dodder, which is a parasite, was beginning to crawl all over them and kill them. So it needed fire. This land needed fire. You need to be able to see through the trees. The concept that we are bringing forth when we work out on the land is this open concept. We've got to be able to see through. When the baby is inside of the basket, look through the basket. See the world. See through the basket to the outer world. See through the forest. See through from this world to the next world. Always the ability to see through.
Fire keeps the ground clean, fire keeps our environment clean. Fire is to keep the plants healthy, that they keep growing more materials for us to use. It's a win-win situation for the plant and for us. Every plant is affected by fire. We as basket weavers, we are totally dependent upon the land for all of our materials because we can't go down to Michael's and buy all of our basket materials. And we need a full year, full cycle to gather our materials. This plant is struggling, but if it could get burned and burned back, it would have a whole bunch of new, just really straight shoots come out the top. But you can see how long of a piece that we need. One good thing, if we could have a fire, it brings the springs back. The water level comes up. So the springs hold more water.
Fire is always about water. Why are these still green? These are beautiful. We haven't seen water for a month. Because they're holding water in their root system. And why does the water still in the river, creek down here? Because all these plants are still holding water and letting the water go gently down into the creek. When you open this up, snow, rain is able to get to the root system. And then the root system retains water. What we have done here by opening up this forest and this little ecosystem is we've returned the water.
Native communities in California in the past have used fire for a whole variety of purposes, including increasing the fruit production of plants, burning plants in order to encourage a certain sort of plant growth.
I think a really critical part of the way that it was done here in California is that when they did small burns, what would happen is you would get grasslands and berries and other plants that would come back. And typically, studies that have been done suggest that the diversity and the density of the foods that are from those plants really increases in that year or two after a burn.
This idea that you have a moderate level of disturbance, that's when you have the highest levels of diversity and richness in an environment.
By doing something like here, like the cultural burn, we're hoping and looking forward to obviously, the straighter shoots and everything, but better berry production, the next season. So, we're all kind of curious and excited to see the fruits of our labor, come next season and see where we're at with this. So before we burned, when all this was still pretty overgrown and everything, I don't think any of us had noticed that any of this was actually growing here. So after it burned and everything, it was probably just kind of choked out by a big mass of sourberry that was here.
Today at the cultural burn site, the community fire crew was able to do a little bit of preparation for a burn in a few months, reducing the risk that when we light that burn, the fire will escape very quickly. So usually one of the top priority objectives of a prescribed burn would be to clear out the shrubs and trees that are representing fuel that a wildfire could come in and burn. It usually has a creeping fire where the fire creeps along the ground and under the trees and even some of the shrubs without burning them to a crisp. Fire is really a lot like electricity. Electricity is a dangerous thing. You can get a severe shock from electricity and it can kill people, but it can also be put to wonderful uses. And fire, when used in a sophisticated manner, is very much the same way. Fire can course through the forest like electrons through a wire and energize those circuits that the forest has. It can turn on the meadows and encourage them to bloom at the right time of the year.
Fire is a spirit. This land has spirits. And when we're burning, they come alive. And those spirits, they still here. That's why we do sing to them. That's why we do talk to them. You have to understand fire. You have to respect fire. You can't be afraid of it. If you're afraid of fire, you won't understand fire.
The Spaniards wanted to suppress fire because they saw it as dangerous and did not necessarily understand what purposes people were putting the fire to. They saw it as a careless application of fire by what many of them referred to as, quote, primitive people, unquote. So fire suppression is very much tied up with social and political oppression of Native American people. It might sound like a good thing to have a lot of trees. That's what the Forest Service thought. And they wanted to maximize the number of trees per acre. But what they were doing was changing the landscape, getting lots of little thin trees in between the bigger trees and the wide spacings that had been maintained for thousands of years by indigenous fires. By suppressing fire and keeping people from lighting cultural burns, you built up the fuel over time. And that's what has led to a situation today where the forest is full of trees, but really closely packed and ready for that spark and for a huge wildfire to start at any time.
We continue to follow breaking news out of the Santa Clarita area, where 200 firefighters are battling a fast-moving brush fire along northbound Highway 14 near Sand Canyon. It's quickly burning, currently at 2,500 acres with 0% containment.
A devastating blaze tearing through Southern California overnight. Moving fast, tripling in size, and engulfing more than 18,000 acres of land. More than 82,000 residents have evacuated as air tankers work tirelessly to douse the flames. The Blue Cut fire started Tuesday, just 60 miles east of Los Angeles, closing down a major interstate and roadways as it grew. The governor of California declaring a state of emergency.
Fire is going to be on the land, whether we like it or not. We can either choose when and where and how we prepare for it and how to deal with it, or continue on with fire suppression and hope really that it don't come back, but it eventually will. And the problem is it becomes these high-intensity super fires that cause nothing but damage. There's no benefit to it. I'm doing some shell sorting, the heavy fractions from flotation that we took in our tribal's traditional territory, finding even some fragments of fire-cracked rock, and getting a good number of all this for its relevance in our land tending uses in our territory. With cultural burns, you not only are removing those fuel loads that create those super fires, but you're healing the earth. When you wait for those big super fires or those wildfires, they destroy the soil, they bake the soil, it sterilizes it, kills a lot of the fire-dependent and non-fire-dependent seeds in the seed bank. It gets to a level of intensity where people can't stop it or suppress it anymore. Having prescribed burns, cultural burns, is something that we all realize, at least with experience on the land, that is something that needs to be done.
I've heard some forests describe this as an ecological disaster on the scale of Hurricane Katrina. Tree mortality is a huge problem in the Sierra right now. There are millions of dead pine trees, even without thinking about whether there's a hugely elevated fire risk because of these brown and dried needles. It's a different forest from now on than it was, a couple years ago or 10 or 20 years ago. Even if you view this as a catastrophe or a disaster, it can also be viewed as an opportunity for the Forest Service to collaborate with tribes like Gold Springs Rancheria of Mono Indians to really talk together and collaborate and design those fires and those burn plans in such a way that you can meet the objectives that a tribe might have for caring for its cultural resources, while at the same time linking together many, many cultural burns to build a whole area of reduced fire risk, because you are reducing the amount of fuel in the area at the same time. So the Forest Service came in about a month and a half ago and conducted this burn, and did give some notice to the tribe that they were going to conduct the burn to improve the health of the oaks and increase acorn production. Definitely affected the trees. It looks like they're greening up and coming back. The future of fire really depends on more collaboration between American Indian tribes and other agencies who have an interest in and a stake in fire, and how to use it and how to minimize its destructive risks and maximize its creative potential.
If you have a brand new house and nobody lives in it and nobody cares for it, in a matter of a couple of years, it will begin to fall apart. It needs to have somebody living in it. And this land has to have somebody living in it. When you live in the mountains, when that's been your home, you know when your home is dirty. You know when your home needs to be cleaned. You know when things are not right. And so by not having fire on the land, not only Native Americans, ranchers, people who use the mountains, people who understand the forest, they'll all tell you the same thing. Our forest is trashy. You cannot leave it like that. You have to have fire in order to have rejuvenation.
I had forgotten how good that was. I had seen it once before, but the second time around, I got a lot more out of it. Wonderful series. Before we begin our discussion, I would like to introduce you to our two other panelists. Heidi Harper Lucero is an indigenous anthropologist and a culture bearer for the Ajachemen and Mutsun Ohlone tribes. She is an accomplished native artist and basket weaver, a teacher of traditional cultural knowledge, including the use of native foods to improve the health of native populations, and an activist fighting for the protection of sacred sites and the return of ancestors and sacred objects under the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. She is the newly elected tribal chairwoman of the Ohlone Band of Mission Indians, Ajachemen Nation. Dahl Aldern is an environmental historian and fire practitioner. Retired from educational and tribal government staff careers, he is a lead investigator and research associate with the West on Fire Research and Education Initiative of the Huntington-USC Institute on California and the West. And he's a co-founder of the Sierra Sequoia Burn Cooperative. I'm going to turn this back over for discussion now to both of them, along with Josh.
All right, thank you. Thanks again. Thanks to both of you for being here. And I guess I'll, since we heard a little from Jared in the video, I'll turn to Heidi. What are your sort of thoughts on rewatching that segment, and maybe how it connects here in Southern California and to your communities?
I was really excited to rewatch it. I have all my students watch it. I teach at Cal State Long Beach, so I have them all watch it. I actually invited them tonight to this for extra credit. But, you know, it's really nice to watch it again after last March. I participated with, as a representative of my tribe, to do a cultural burn in our traditional basketry area. So it's really nice to watch that a lot of the members of the Mono tribe are having the same, you know, the same feelings as we are about doing burns and the benefits of the burns that, you know, they're having in their areas. Yeah.
Thanks. And can you speak a little bit as a weaver, what sort of benefits you saw in the aftermath of the cultural burn?
Yeah, so the burn, we had been asking for the burn for a long time, but just because of weather conditions, the humidity levels, the wind, we hadn't been able to have one for a long time. And you couldn't get into our, the sumac, the rust trilobata. In the video, they call it sourberry. It's same plant, but we use it a little bit differently than they do up there. So you couldn't get into the bushes at all. The sticks were really crooked and dry. They were really densely packed. There was lots of Russian thistle growing in, and all around it. So it was really even hard to get back in there. And we also have a plant called Juncus textilis that we use for our baskets as well. And they're both in the same area. So they did a burn on that as well. 3 weeks later, I went back and there already had new shoots coming up. The Juncus textilis had 3-inch new shoots already coming up. So it was really exciting to see that. We also copiced a elderberry tree that was out in the middle of that area as well. And it's already growing back nice and healthy. There was a lot of dead limbs that needed to be taken away. So hopefully that's a medicine plant for us, for most of the tribes here in California. The berries are useful. We use the, in the video, you saw the man singing with a stick. That's a clapper stick, and that's made from elderberry. That elderberry tree is really important for us for that as well as the flowers. They're a fever reducer for us. So the plant is really useful. So it's good to continue to create the relationships that are important with our non-human relatives, our plant relatives, to make sure that they're growing well. And, it's definitely a reciprocal relationship with plants for Native people. And so making sure that we go out there and, do burns to make sure that they grow better, and coppice, when it needs to be. And so just a reminder when we watch the film is that, having burns is not something that's a negative thing. It's a positive thing, especially when we talk about, when the leaf litter gets so bad, the fuel gets so thick, we don't have beneficial fires. We have fires that are, completely catastrophic for, the environment and for people who live in those areas as well. So.
Yeah. And Jared, you spoke in the film about, most of these cultural burns are relatively small, compared to the scale of some of the huge fires we're thinking. And you sort of spoke about the ways that they can kind of add up to something that has this kind of region-wide or statewide impact.
Right. Yes. So I am a co-founder of a group that's just getting off the ground called the Sierra Sequoia Burn Cooperative here in the central and southern Sierra areas. And we are right now very fortunate to get some funding that's essentially some startup funding, although we've had some get-togethers to do some work, including one burn day previous to this. But we're really looking forward to implementing this plan that we have with this new funding, in particular in 3 specific sites that are in Holcomb Mono homelands. So I'm retired. I no longer work for Cold Springs Rancheria, as the subtitle said in the film. But that is, I'm still working with them as part of this coalition, this co-op. And that's where many Holcomb people live today, is at Cold Springs Rancheria. So there are 3 spots a little higher up in elevation, up the slope. And one of the really important things that we've done is put together these plans for burns in these 3 locations that are located along traditional Holcomb Mono trails. And I mentioned the possibility of working, possibly with the Forest Service, and I'd like to hear a lot more about the collaboration that Heidi has had with the cultural burns that they're getting going with the Cleveland National Forest. These three burns that we're, commencing with now are actually on private property, but I can envision essentially chaining together some burns along these traditional trails that may, I would hope eventually involve the Forest Service, because the trails, it's a very complex web of trails that traverses the western slope of the Sierra Nevada. And if you can chain together these cultural islands, basically, or make an archipelago of areas that are tended by native people for their cultural resources and for, as Lois Connor Bona mentioned in the film, and Ron Good also did mention the water benefits, bringing water back. You're also reducing the fuels, as the fire managers from the Forest Service and elsewhere from the agencies refer to them. And you're starting to maybe chain together these archipelagos of areas that would be less likely to burn severely in a wildfire, and also could provide some, let's say, tactical locations for firefighters in the event of a big incident, so that this area that maybe you've opened up under oaks now serves as a shaded fuel break, or it could serve as a safety zone for firefighters, so that they know that they can get to this clearing, in their daily plan. They're always identifying safety zones that they might want to use, or they could serve as what are called anchor points for future prescribed burns of a larger scale. So an anchor point is where you start a fire, like a prescribed burn, or during a wildfire incident, there are backfires that firefighters use to burn out an area, so that when the larger fire front comes through, there's no more fuel to burn. So these cultural areas along traditional trails where indigenous people have always burned could essentially serve as a part of a broader wildfire management system, potentially.
Yeah, I noticed that they've done that in my area. So we have two areas that we gather from, and one is along a trail. And I noticed that I found out at the burn that the hotshots had been out there raking up the leaf litter and doing small fires to, burn the fuel. So I was pretty, excited about that, because we've had some severe burns in the Cleveland National Forest that came close to a lot of houses. So I'm glad that they're being proactive about, reducing the fuel, but there's still a lot of area that, needs to be tended and taken care of.
What was your negotiation like? Do you know, Heidi, in terms of like negotiating with the National Forest, and how does that kind of collaboration work?
So as a basket weaver, I was contacted to collaborate with them. And so I went out 2 days and worked with them on what areas were of the highest importance for us to burn, and how far they wanted us to burn back. And then it was pretty nice to see that it wasn't just forestry, it was forestry, CAL FIRE, and hotshots that all came out to help. So it was a nice collaboration with all of them there working. So, and then we took them on a couple hikes where, the tribe, we have some sacred sites there. So we showed them some of our areas. They had heard about them. So I wanted to make sure that if there was a fire, that they needed to protect those areas as well. So.
It's fantastic. Yeah.
Jared, have you, how have you witnessed this sort of interagency, different levels of government, different, sovereignties kind of overlapping?
Right. So in our burn cooperative, it's a coalition of 4 tribes. Cold Springs and Big Sandy Rancheria, North Fork Rancheria, and the Dunlap Band of Mono. And it's so they're all Mono tribes at the moment. So it's an intertribal coalition, and essentially consists of several these 3 private landowners, and that are involved in our current plans for burns, and other private landowners, and just other fire practitioners, including Southern California Edison, who provides a lot of power for the Los Angeles area, where a lot of you are right now, from the Big Creek Hydroelectric project. And they own, so Edison owns 15,000 acres around an area called Shaver Lake, and then another 5,000, so 20,000 altogether, but the other 5,000 is sort of down an area called Dinky Creek. And they have been engaged in a burning and selective timber harvesting or thinning program for a good 40 years. So, it's a matter of you can't do one burn and then expect to be done. You have to make these repeat entries into the area and take care of it. So they're a partner with us in the sense that a couple of their personnel are going to actually serve as burn bosses for our burns, and we're since it's private land, we're working with CAL FIRE. It's called State Responsibility Area, but it's also surrounded by all 3 properties where we're working are surrounded by a national forest adjacent to the Sierra National Forest. So we're talking with the National Forest staff, and even though they won't be directly involved in the burn, we want them to be comfortable with the plans for the burn. So we're talking with them and building relationships as we go along. Mm. Yeah. But that's exciting to hear, Heidi, that you had that group and all the agencies there.
Yeah, and they are excited to do some more because there's some fallen trees in our other area, and there's the leaf litter, because it's all under the Juncus textilis likes to grow underneath the oaks, and so it's really got a lot of leaf litter, and so it's choking them out. The leaf litter is choking out the Juncus, so we're talking to them about doing a burn over in that area as well, and doing some removal of the trees. And the only problem is that because it hasn't burned in so long, there's so much poison oak there, and that would be another benefit is burning and getting rid of a lot of the poison oak as well.
Jared, you just mentioned sort of all the relationships that are necessary, and I find that to be true in museum work, and that it's about these sort of long-term. I don't know, Heidi, do you want to sort of speak to what you've sort of experienced in terms of relationships among with this burn, but maybe also just the relationships among different practices that it sounds like there's not only the basket weaving, but food benefits to these, and
ultimately,
other.
It's all interrelated. When we as Native people go out and harvest, not only for basket materials, but we also go out and harvest for food materials as well. The burns are super important for the health of the oaks as well. When you burn the underbrush under the oaks, it benefits the oak tree itself, and it makes a better area for us to gather, the oaks, when the acorns, when they fall, which is our staple food here in California, besides our, meat products, but, acorn is really our staple food. And so, making sure that those burns occur for the health of the oaks is really important. And so when I go out to do a burn, I'm not always just so concerned just about basket material. It's about the food resources as well, because I work with a Chia Cafe Collective, which has a partnership with the Autry as well. We were part of that exhibit on foods. And so it's something that, you're finding as a Native person, you're being called to create all these partnerships with different groups. And, they're important partnerships. We both benefit from those types of partnerships. And, being able to expose people who are not Native to the importance of Native plants, like such as the garden outside, the ethnobotanical garden. It's something that, I think a lot of people have become more exposed to the importance of Native plants just by that exhibit, and having talks with us. We came and did a demo for our book, the Chia Cafe Collective book, and in the ethnobotanical garden, and we actually prepared foods for everyone to taste and try that were all from Native California. So, it's this whole cycle of relationships that are all interwoven together, and make it beneficial for all of us here in California.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was something I took away from this ongoing project, right? It's just that it's not just, there are these functional benefits potentially in controlling wildfires or these actual these specific plant benefits and getting straight shoots and stuff, but it's more about that, all those relationships together, it almost seemed like, right?
Yeah, we had a lot of fun, hanging out with the fire guys and, our weavers and our, I also do a lot of archaeology work. So, that burn was right in one of our archaeology sites, a debitage site. So we had to make sure that we were really careful in that area as well. So, but, we had other Native monitors that were out there with us, just to ensure that everything was okay. So it's getting them to, not be afraid to speak up, to the fire and let them know, what's important. And, that, they wanted to cut a bunch of stuff on the elderberry tree. And I'm like, nope, you got to only cut this one and only cut that one. And, because we want to make sure that it grows back healthy. So, but it's also teaching them as well, why it's important. And, we brought basket samples out, so they knew what the material was used for and how it was used. And, we kind of gave them a talk about, why elderberry is important. And we brought clapper sticks and, elderberry syrup that we'd made. And so they know that, the importance of it to us. It's not just a plant that's growing out there. It's, it has a very significant importance. So,
yeah. And Jared, you had mentioned there have been some recent developments in just state law in California that that may be able to, I don't know if it's the wind is changing direction or on this, so to speak, or something, but I don't know if you want to speak a little on that.
Sure. Yes, there are three very recent pieces of legislation in California that the governor has now signed, or one is not actually a law, but it's part of the state budget plan. Yeah, first, just to tag on to what Heidi was saying in terms of relationships, I've had the privilege and great opportunity to visit what are called TREXs, or training exchanges, up on the Klamath with the Yurok Treks and the Mid-Klamath Treks with the Karuk tribe. And I was really impressed with, their true exchanges. So yes, there's a lot of technical training for people who are going to be prescribed burners or firefighters, but there's also this idea, in some wonderful sessions with Native stories and demonstrations with, you know, as you were saying, Heidi, with basket materials to show what the benefits and what the real purpose behind the burning, the cultural burning is. So there's learning and relationship building going on all the time. And this does relate back to one of these new pieces of legislation, which was Assembly Bill 642. It's, you know, the three things in combination, the three pieces of legislation are really, could be pretty remarkable for California, a real turning point. But 642 includes, one of the things it includes is provision for a new state prescribed fire center. There's a potential for Native people to really be involved deeply in what that training is going to consist of, you know, and what the curriculum will consist of. So that's part of it. And it also establishes a position with CAL FIRE, a statewide cultural fire liaison, cultural burning liaison. So CAL FIRE will now have an official full-time liaison to tribes and to cultural burners. Another important piece is a bill that came out of the Senate Bill 332, that establishes, it relieves some of the risk or liability for state certified burn bosses, which in itself is a fairly new program, where the state of California is certifying that these burn bosses have been through enough training and are, you know, have the expertise and experience to be able to go ahead and conduct a burn, a prescribed burn. But the other thing it does is it has this language in the bill that puts cultural burners on equal footing with state certified burn bosses. So essentially, it's saying that California Native American tribes will be able to certify their own burners, or burn bosses, if you want to call them that, and the state will back them up, you know, and will work with them. And then the last piece I mentioned, the state budget plan, is essentially a pool of, it's an insurance pool, essentially. And it's a pilot program. It's $20 million. And what it is it will be available possibly to burn bosses who are not able to get insurance coverage, which is really difficult to say, I'm going to go out and do this burn. Essentially, it's not available at the present time. So $20 million, in California real estate terms is not an incredibly huge amount of money, but it is something that burn bosses may be able to draw upon to get a little bit of feeling that they have insurance to cover their liability and reduce their own financial risk for going ahead with the burns that they're going ahead with.
That'll be great.
Yeah.
So I wanted to start to turn to a couple of the audience questions, maybe, if that's all right, unless either of you feel free to also jump in with anything else that is sparked in the conversation. One of the questions is how is the climate crisis affecting the timing of burns in California now that it's hotter and drier than even in the last century? Does cultural burning become even more crucial, or does it also become more difficult?
It definitely, it becomes more difficult, when there's not enough humidity in the soil, they'll cancel a burn. If it's too windy, if the conditions aren't right, we've had several canceled. So yeah, it's definitely not in the favor of, doing a burn, if if the conditions aren't right, if they're, especially during fire season, if it's too windy, they won't do it. They have Jared, maybe you know what it's called. They have a device that they put on the ground and it checks the humidity in the soil. And I'm not sure what it's called. Yeah, so it checks the humidity in the soil, and if there's not enough humidity in the soil, then they won't do the burn. So, and it also has to do with air quality. So if we're having burns, if they're having wildfires in other areas of the state, or the wind is blowing that smoke into our areas, if the air quality is not at a certain level, then they won't allow a burn to occur either.
So burners talk about burn windows, and it's the idea that a window of opportunity will open where those conditions will be right. And in the past few years, it is true that the burn windows have been narrower and narrower. For instance, at one of our burn sites that we're trying to get a burn going, we weren't ready to burn last year, but the conditions were such. This is at an elevation of about 6,000 feet in the Sierra Nevada. And what happened was it just did not rain throughout October and November and into December. No rain, so it was far too dry. The wood, the fuels were far too dry. And then suddenly they got an 8-inch snow, which shut down any possibility of burning. So last year there was no burn window whatsoever, and we're looking. So it's a challenge. I mean, it's hard to make predictions about trends, but yes, it does. The conditions seem to be getting hotter and drier, and especially as Heidi said, if you have wind associated with those hotter and drier conditions, it becomes very difficult to try to finesse that so that you can time a burn and do it safely.
Yeah, and especially down here in Southern California, there's been virtually no rain, so and that makes it impossible for those windows are, just like up in your area, Jared, no window if there's no rain.
Right.
I have a question, Jared. I was up in North Fork a couple years ago at a basket event for SEBA, and I noticed there was a lot of dead pine trees when you're out, in their cultural center. When you look out, there was so many dead pine trees. How is that affecting, are they, chopping those down and, removing those, to prevent those from creating larger fires?
Right. That was a huge event that we talked about a little bit in the film. Just sort of a disaster, of its own, which was the drought combined with the lack of rain and snow that we've had over the past decade, really, and pine beetle kill. So the pine beetles were taking advantage of the trees being stressed and not having the sap basically to keep the pine beetles out. So there were, I know at one point, at the point where that film was made in 2016, I think that the figure was 60 million trees in the Sierra had been, 60 million, the mortality figure was 60 million trees. And I'm pretty sure that it increased to 88 million, or I'm not sure of the exact figure, but it's even greater. So in terms of fire risk, with that huge landscape and millions upon millions of trees, you can't cut and remove a real significant portion through the whole landscape. And nor would you want to, because you want to leave some snags, some dead trees as wildlife habitat. But there was a lot of effort focused on removing trees from roadways, and campgrounds, what are called hazard trees. So a lot of that work was done. And I'll just say, when a tree is dead and standing straight up, it's maybe not such a huge fire risk, because it's sort of like if you think about making a campfire or a fire in a wood stove, if you stand a log on end, it's going to be difficult to light that log. You want to lay it over horizontally and get some little kindling. So the real danger is only still developing right now, because there's still a lot of those trees out there. And as they start to fall in, kind of a jackstrawed manner on top of each other, and they're making these sort of crazy piles. And then the kindling is the shrubs, the manzanita and the ceanothus that's growing up underneath them. And that's a real worry. We're 5 years out from the peak of that mortality event, and just unfortunately really getting into the peak of the flammability, I think. So last year we had the creek fire in our area, which at that time was the largest single wildfire, which has since been surpassed this year, but it was just under 300,000 acres, and it did burn through areas with a lot of that high tree mortality. I mean, that wasn't the only factor as to why that fire was so widespread and so severe, but it definitely contributing. It's scary in some of those areas. It's scary to drive down some of those forest roads and you realize, wait a minute, these trees could could fall on me at any moment. Yeah.
We have one more question, or there's kind of two that might fit together. That one person says, you don't hear as much about cultural burning in Southern California. Is that a function of less land on native reservations or tribal lands, or less forests and more sage scrub and chaparral that aren't supposed to burn regularly, or air quality or proximity to structure, or some function of all these? And then someone else asks about the within a sort of shrubland environment, about the danger of invasive weeds, and how do we ensure that these lands burn with a frequency that won't favor exotic species?
As for Southern California, I think that a lot of that is a problem. Probably one of the main reasons you don't hear about Native people being involved in cultural burns is because there's a lot of tribes that aren't recognized in Southern California, especially in the Los Angeles and Orange County areas. Both tribes that are Aboriginal to those areas are not federally recognized. Most of the time we don't have, we aren't consulted in those burn processes. But as basket weavers, we've kind of inserted ourselves into those arenas to start those conversations, and let the forestry departments know that those are important to us. And what we're trying to achieve culturally, in the revival of basket weaving. But I do think it also has to do with the conditions in Southern California. Like Jared said, the windows of burn time are, very small, and they have been very small over the past few years because of the drought in Southern California.
I'll just add, before I moved to Central California, I lived for 24 years in San Diego County, and learned a little bit about fire, including cultural fire in that area in Southern California. And I will just say that yes, chaparral, if it burns frequently, it will disappear. If it's burned appropriately and with care, the exotic invasives can be kept to a minimum, but that's all a matter of, again, burning under the right conditions and timing those burns correctly. For instance, so that you're timing them so that you reduce the seed stock of those invasive grasses and encourage other grasses and herbs to come back in instead. So it's a tricky kind of situation, but for thousands upon thousands of years, the indigenous people of Southern California put together a very sophisticated way of culturing their landscape with fire.
And the thing with that is when you burn on a regular basis, you have what they call a cold burn. You don't have a hot burn. A hot burn is when the leaf litter is so high and the fuel is so high that it burns so hot that it's devastating. When you have a cold burn, what they call a cold burn, it just kind of burns the top layer off, and it doesn't burn and penetrate down deep into the soil. So, if those burns are done on a regular basis, they are beneficial, compared to those, when you have like a forest fire that, isn't intentionally set, it burns because the litter is so high and the fuel is so high that it burns out of control, and it burns so hot that, it's burning deep into the soil and deep into the roots.
And Heidi, you mentioned some of the prep that happened in before your burn in the Cleveland National Forest, and that's something that I've learned from Ron Good, who was the chairman of the North Fork Mono Tribe, who was in the video, is just the critical importance of prep work ahead of time to make sure that oak trees and other plants aren't burning too hot when you apply the fire in the area, and also what you do after a burn, the mop up. Ron and his tribal members and his volunteers go and work the ashes into the soil, and really there are a lot of things that you can do post fire that are extremely important, in addition to preparing for the fire and lighting the fire itself.
Yep, absolutely. And a lot of times when we're talking about invasive plants, it's not necessarily a fire. Sometimes as basket weavers, we have to go out and coppice and pull weeds and and things like that. And we have Cal Fire will work with us. They'll just say, pull it off to the side, and they'll come and pick it up, and take care of it. So it's not always about, when you have invasive plants, especially in our basket areas, it's, about us as weavers going out and, taking care of it as well. And, not that a fire isn't welcomed when it's needed, but we also have to use other methods to make sure those areas are clear as well.
So I'm going to combine a couple questions here that kind of are asking more on the cultural side of the equation. One person asks, in Braiding Sweetgrass, the book, the author mentions the tradition of asking the earth for permission to take from it before you actually do. Is this a ritual performed before controlled fire burning by indigenous people? And then another person asks, besides making materials grow more efficiently, is there any other cultural religious reason for the burning?
Yeah, we always, that I think that was one of my main reasons that wanting to be out there is to, when we coppice, when we cut, when we take, and even when we burn, we always say a prayer and give an offering when we do that. So yes, those protocols for our tribe were done when we did our burn. I can't speak on somebody else's tribe for those, but for mine, yeah, we do. And we always, even when we gather sage or when we gather acorns or, basket material, whatever it is, we always give an offering and a prayer, and let those relatives that are growing know that we come and we take it in a good way, and we're going to use them in a good way, and we're going to take what we need and not more than that. And so that's a protocol that we do use. A lot of times I go out and gather for my elders too, because a lot of them, are, elderly and they can't get out there, but they still want to eat traditional foods and they still want to basket weave. So, I'll go out and gather for them as well.
One person just asked about how did the Autry go about developing the exhibit in relation to indigenous knowledge? Did they work with a certain tribe? From my knowledge of it, we worked with a lot of different representatives from dozens of different communities and tribes and nations, and kind of this was one of the benefits of working with KCET, was being able to travel to different parts of the state to visit people there, in addition to people being able to come to Los Angeles. So there were a lot of, there are a lot of different tribes in California. And I don't know if Heidi, you want to add anything about
105 federally recognized tribes, and there's 87 tribes that are seeking federal recognition. And so I know that there was a collaboration with a lot of them, especially, if you go to the exhibit, you'll see that there's different areas of California. So when they did the desert area, they, had collaboration with the desert tribes. When they talked about the Southern coast, they came and talked to a lot of the coastal tribes in Southern California. And same with when they talk about the salmon, they contacted all the tribes up there as well. So yeah, it was a very huge collaboration in all areas of the project as well. So there was the ethnobotanical garden, there was the California, what's the name of that exhibit? It's
California Continued, or Human Nature is the specific gallery within that. It's kind of
yeah. But I mean, I think there was 4 different exhibits that had opened at the same time, and all of those were collaborated with California, tribes. So it was great.
So it looks like we're almost out of time. I'm going to answer one more, or raise one more question, I think. So someone says, thank you so much for this enlightening discussion. I have 2 questions. As benefits of prescribed fire are increasingly recognized and adopted by the Forest Service and CAL FIRE and others, has cultural fire helped make broader gains in land back activism? And that's, one of you maybe can help spell out what land back kind of means for people who might not know. And then secondly, as the burn windows decrease, is it possible to make use of managed wildfires when fires lit by lightning or accidentally ignited can meet ecological needs? Is that just too difficult?
The land back activism is about the return of indigenous lands to indigenous people. And as for my tribe, we're not federally recognized. We're in the process of seeking federal recognition. But I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm not quite sure how land back relates to fire. But maybe, Jared, you might know something about it, with the Mono tribes, because they are, they're all recognized, right? All 4 of them are recognized.
The 4 that we're working with, 3 are federally recognized, and 1 is not, the Dunlap Band. And also we're working with North Fork Rancheria. That's a separate tribe from Ron Good's tribe, which is the North Fork Mono tribe. And the North Fork Mono tribe is also not federally recognized. But I did work with Ron. I still do. I've worked with him for many years, and I worked with him pretty extensively for several years. He and I worked together and wrote a curriculum, and just spent a lot of time with him. And one of the things I learned from him, even coming from the perspective, so I can't speak for him, But I would say that what I learned from him is that fire and all of his cultural practices, even his, let's say ceremonial practices that are associated, some of the things you mentioned that are the ceremony that's associated with fire, with a burn, all of that is really an expression of a hold on land. So even though it might not be legal title that's being granted back to a tribe, by virtue of putting these activities into practice, it's starting to gain a relationship with land back, and so a step toward returning land to tribes could be, I mean, it's not the full step of actually returning land back to indigenous people, but one small step toward that goal is to come up with co-management agreements, so that a tribe, for instance, is working with the Forest Service and has a real say in what's going to happen with the land. So again, it's an expression of that hold on land and relationship with land.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that, it might not be physically getting the land back, but even having a voice in, how to manage that land and what the uses are is a small step, but it's a step in the right direction. I was honored to be asked to go out and consult, in my basket area. I go there all the time, but for, state and federal agencies to acknowledge that, I've been a caretaker of that land and I do use that land. And, it might be, in the Cleveland National Forest, but just that acknowledgement that, Ajachemen people use that land for basketry and food, resources. And, that is saying something, definitely.
I couldn't think of a better place to stop than that. I think that is a nice note to end on, I think. But thank you both for your time and knowledge and sharing all this background with us. And I look forward to whatever future conversations all of this work yields. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
I'm back. Thank you. Thank you. I want to thank our panelists tonight. That was a wonderful program. Heidi Lucero, Dahl Aldern, and Josh Garrett-Davis. And I want to personally thank Laura Purdy, who's the producer of the KCET programs and who is the gateway to all these wonderful people that you've met tonight. We hope we've inspired you to watch the KCET series, visit the Autry Museum exhibit in California Native Plant Garden, and we invite you to participate in the Burbank Reads events coming up this month, including 3 different book discussions, as well as events on reducing food waste, and one on community gardening. You can find more information about these at burbanklibrary.org. Thanks to the Friends of the Burbank Public Library for the support of their support of this program. And my thanks to everyone who helped get the word out on this for us, especially those at KCET and the Autry Museum of the American West. Everyone who registered for this program will be sent a link to the recording of the event, and we urge you to share it with your friends. After we put a slide for a minute or so about the upcoming new KCET segment on Native American land stewardship, you'll be directed to a very brief survey on tonight's event. We value your feedback, and it will help us improve future programming. And thanks to all of you for coming tonight, for all of you who stayed with us. That was amazing retention rate, and we wish you a good night.
Ajachemen.
Thank you.